Hello, hello. My name is Inés Velasquez McBride, and I'm one of the co-lead pastors here at the church we hope for. And I'm here with my good friend, Angela Wu, who is an associate marriage and family therapist. And we're going to have a conversation today about something that we are passionate about, and we believe that we believe that it will bless you as well. We are here to talk about mental self-care. We think that it is important that we talk about mental self-care during a time like this. We are in December of 2020. We have been going on a pandemic that has been going on for a very long time. We all have been experiencing compounded grief, collective grief, and sustained grief this whole year due to this pandemic. And even under ordinary circumstances, though, Angela and I were talking about, even under ordinary circumstances, the holidays are especially hard and are the most difficult time of the year to deal with mental health. So we want to make this conversation normal. We want to make this conversation important and say that mental health is central and critical to our spiritual formation. And so we hope that what we're talking about today will bless you. And I'm excited to introduce my friend, Angela Wu. Let me tell you a little bit about Angela, and then she'll be able to share a little bit about herself. Angela graduated from Fuller Theological Seminary's Marriage and Family Therapy program in 2019, and she has since been working as a mental health therapist in community mental health with underserved populations. Previously, she had been a high school teacher in Miami and in the Bay Area, working in Title I schools in hopes of bringing equitable education to marginalized communities. And she has been on a journey of coming home to herself. I love that, Angela, of coming home to herself and learning to embody the fullness and uniqueness of who she is called to be. In her free time, she enjoys creating through music and writing, hiking with her Rottweiler mix, and has recently picked up kickboxing and roller skating. You'll have to tell me more about kickboxing some other time, Angela. I love that. But thank you for being here, Angela. Is there anything that you'd like to say to self-introduce as well?
Well, thank you for having me. I think that's a great introduction. I should know I wrote it.
Yes, that's right. She wrote it. I did not know all these things about her, but we're learning about each other.
We are.
I'm glad that you are here, though. I'm very excited about this conversation. And Angela, you and I were talking as we've been praying and preparing and planning for this time. We've been saying how mental health should be part of our spiritual formation, and how historically the church, there has been a stigma in society, but especially in the church. The church has not known how to talk about mental health, how to address mental health. The church sometimes has used hurtful methods to address mental health. You know, you were saying something about praying off your depression or praying off your mental illness. And the church has not just historically has just not known what to do with mental health. And we see it in the scriptures that mental health is addressed. And you're going to tell us more about that. And then some of us come from communities. I don't know about you, but the Latinx community, there's a stigma even there in my Latinx community about mental health. I am an immigrant. I grew up in Nicaragua, experienced a lot of trauma and tragedy, and I never met with a therapist. I never knew a therapist. We didn't have access to those resources. So there's a stigma there also in our ethno-racial communities about mental health. So.
Exactly. Everything you just said, you know, how our theology of mental health or non-theology really influences the way we take care of ourselves, and compounded by the messages that we internalize from our culture about ourselves and our mental health. And so, yeah, I'd love to kind of just dive into how I integrate my spirituality with mental health. And I kind of want to start with just my own personal theology. Like you mentioned before, there are churches that kind of favor the spirit over the flesh, right? And that actually comes from, you know, a theology that a racist theology, where, you know, when the slaves were introduced to the gospel, they started to see this incongruence with their lived realities and what's written in the Bible. And the Bible says liberation for the oppressed and the marginalized, to set the captives free. And when they see what's going on in their realities, they're like, what's going on? This is not the gospel. But because of greed and power, they were told that it didn't matter what happened to their bodies, so long as their souls were saved, right? So that they could continue to be enslaved to get free labor and money and all those things. And so I think it's so important to recognize the history of where some of the interpretations of the gospel comes from. And when we kind of, say spirit trumps flesh, it causes us to minimize and dismiss our human feelings and our lived experience, and just invalidate our emotions, which impairs our mental health. Yeah.
I love what you're saying, Angela. I think I'm hearing you say that that Jesus and God has always cared not only for our souls, but what happens to the bodies connected to those souls. And when we see the witness of Jesus, and I know that you're going to talk about this more even as you're sharing, when we see the witness of Jesus, he did not only care about souls going to heaven, but he touched, he healed. And we see several examples when he was healing someone. He was healing the woman who had been, shunned because of her issue of bleeding for 12 years. He knew that that person not only was struggling with a physical ailment, but they had been alienated from society and shunned from society. And many other of those healing moments, he wasn't just healing their bodies, he was restoring them into community. And he was saying, we have to do this together and not be in isolation, and that he cares for physical bodies and he cares what happens to the bodies connected to our souls. And it is amazing to see, yes, how that has been taken to destructive ideologies, to the history of slavery in the United States, the history of what happens to other bodies. I think the greatest lie that justifies any injustice towards bodies, especially bodies of color in the United States, is that some bodies are worth less than others, and our bodies are connected to our minds. And so today, I hope that we're able to unpack some of that conversation. So,
yeah, exactly. And I think something that's really hard for us to remember is that Jesus was fully human.
That's right.
And, even though people understand that idea of Jesus being human, they always kind of minimize that as like, oh, but he was perfect, right? Yeah. He was a perfect human. He was flawless.
Yes.
And so that still minimizes our very human experience. But that goes to like, we have to understand, what does perfect mean, right? And I just heard about this theologian, Randy Woodley. He argues that Jesus becoming like God isn't about the idea of perfection. The word perfection, it's a misunderstanding. It doesn't mean like flawlessness, but to be perfect means to fulfill a role. And so if Jesus was perfect in fulfilling his role as a human, what does that mean? It means he fulfilled his role in being limited, in being, flawed, right? In the human sense, in experiencing anxiety and sorrow and pain and joy. And Jesus pooped,
Yeah.
Like, Jesus was a human. Yeah.
Yes.
And we forget that because we're like, oh no, he was perfect.
We forget that.
But when we understand that perfect actually means to fulfill a role, it helps us see Jesus and our bodies and our human experience in a different way. And we're better to kind of validate our own lived human realities. Right?
To remember that Jesus entered into our lived reality is to just say in simple terms that he entered into our anxiety, and he entered into our grief, and he entered into our worry. He entered into the human limitations of this body, willingly entered to be acquainted with grief so that I could feel heard and seen and known by someone who understands. Because what good is a savior that is perfect and doesn't understand us?
Exactly.
But when he entered this body and his human body, like one of us, then, oh, he can understand. He has carried our anxiety. He has carried our depression. He has carried each and every emotion that God created, anger, sadness, grief, in order for us to experience God, to say, oh, God has access to us through those emotions, and to make that normative, make it okay. Give us permission to feel those things.
Exactly. And, all throughout scripture, it just validates that. And some of the verses that really stand out to me are Mark 12:30-31, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There's no greater commandment than these. And so when I hear this, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much emphasis on the self here. There's three components. There's God, the self, and there's others, right? But what's always the message that is being heard is always love God and love your neighbor. And it's like, what about us?
What about the self?
Ourselves?
Tell us about the self, Angela.
Yeah.
Tell us about self-care. Tell us about this.
Yeah, very clear here that you can't love your neighbor unless you love yourself. And even more, this verse is highlighting like the different parts of ourselves, the soul, the heart, the mind, the strength, the body. And when all these things need caring for. And when we value one over the other, we become disembodied.
Wow.
We become fragmented, right? And so these are all parts of us. And something that I think why it's so hard for people to really love themselves is because they don't really have a good grasp on what loving self is. And because they don't understand how to love themselves, they can't self-care. But self-care is really an act of self-love.
Wow. Amen.
Yeah. And another verse, the first recorded words of Jesus in the book of John was, what do you want?
Wow.
And so that speaks to our desires and what Jesus really asking us, what do we want? Right? What we want matters too.
It's such a gentle question and an honoring question to ask us, for Jesus to ask us, what do you want? It gives us agency to say, oh, I get to tell my need, which is a really hard thing to say. I am in need. This is what I want because this is what I need. And what an interesting conversation between Jesus and us.
I mean, some of the things that I feel like are barriers to self-care is just our understanding, right? What self-care is and what self-care isn't.
Yes. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I will.
Tell us about what self-care is and what it is not. And then some tools about self-care.
So I'm all about nuance, right? I don't think things are binary. It's not black and white. There's so many different layers and complexities. And I think people often mistake self-care as self-indulgence. I don't even know if that's a word, but indulge means to allow yourself to experience the pleasure, to enjoy the pleasure of things. And self-care means the provision of what is necessary for health, welfare, maintenance, protection.
Wow.
And, part of self-care is self-indulgence. Like you allow yourself to enjoy things, right? But self-indulgence isn't necessarily self-care.
Yeah.
Right. I can binge on Netflix.
Yes.
But then after I binge, I'm like, oh my gosh, I still feel like my life was sucked away.
Yes.
I don't feel rested. Right?
Yes.
So I think that when people think of self-care, especially if they've been hearing messages from the church that, don't be indulging of yourself and the flesh is bad, they automatically shut off and they're like, no, this is like, this is simple.
Yeah.
And so number one is to really know that the difference between self-indulgence and self-care.
That's good.
And then there's another kind of internalized message that self-care is selfishness. I think a lot of people have a hard time with understanding self-care is because they mix it up with selfishness. But it's actually paradoxical, because when you're able to care for yourself, you're better able to love others.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the metaphor of putting your oxygen mask on first before putting it on other people or your kids.
Yeah.
Right. And I think those come from different postures and stances, where selfishness is like, I'm putting myself first because I'm filling this void, right? Where self-care is like, I'm putting myself first because this is how I maintain like this wholeness, right?
So I can pour out and care.
Yeah, exactly. So it's nuanced.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think those are some barriers. And I think what's worthy to think about is, there's cultural messages on self-care.
Yes.
There's messages about gender, right?
Yes.
On self-care. What does it mean to self-care as, a single person versus someone who has a family?
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's, in order to truly self-care, you really have to kind of dismantle the messages that you've had about self-care.
I think I'm hearing you say, Angela, that we are all worthy of self-care, that different statuses in life or backgrounds can add challenges to self-care. Like you were saying, how does a single person, it may look like you have more time because you don't have children that you're caring for. That doesn't diminish your need and your need for self-care, and that your body is worthy of self-care, right? I also think about women, married or not, but women who, especially from our communities, at least in my Nicaraguan community or Latinx community, and I wonder same with you, Asian American community, that we have this beautiful image of women being strong. We have to be strong. We have been strong for many generations. Our grandmothers, our aunties, our abuelitas, our ancestors have taught us to be strong, but that can work against ourselves too, because that need to be strong constantly doesn't allow us to express need and to answer the question of Jesus, oh, I need to not be strong right now. I need to care for myself right now. I am weak right now. And it's okay. We don't have to be super women all the time. Like, I know we are super women, but super women also have limitations, right?
Yeah. And what does it mean to care for ourselves without apologizing?
Yes. Yes.
Without asking for permission, without feeling shame, right? Or guilt.
Yes. I find that sometimes my saying no is one of the hardest things to do. Angela, I don't know if this is a challenge for you, married or not, with children or not. Just the word no is such an important word in self-care, to say, no, I cannot do this. My father used to tell me growing up, Inés, you give too many explanations about your no. You just need to say, thank you for the invitation. No, I cannot do this. I felt like I had to explain why I could not do this, whether it was to the church or to someone needing help, because then we get overstretched so much that our self becomes so dissolved, and we become a shell to ourselves, even though the community may think, oh, that person is so strong, but we feel completely evaporated. Our souls and our bodies are crushed because we haven't learned to say no. So saying no has been an important aspect of my self-care, without excusing it or explaining it.
Exactly. It's just like in Ecclesiastes, right? Or that Simon and Garfunkel song, there's a time for everything.
That's right.
I don't know which inspired which.
I don't know. That's right.
But like, just because you say no now doesn't mean it's a no forever.
That's right. That is so important.
So, to know that there's seasons to say no, and that's okay, and seasons to say yes.
That's good. That is so good. I love everything that you're saying, Angela. How about some spiritual practices that you can give us about mental health, and also the self-care tools that we were talking about? So give us those nuances about practical things now that we know mental health is important for our spiritual formation. Jesus had to take care of his mental health, and we have a savior who dealt with not only souls, but bodies. And that is important and central to the gospel. How about some practices and tools about spiritual health and self-care tools?
Yeah. So I mean, I think saying no is biblical. No.
Seriously. Your pastor and Angela, we're both saying no is okay.
In Proverbs 3.
That's right. Proverbs 32. Is that
right? Proverbs 32.
After the woman one. Yeah.
Look it up. You must have the wrong Bible.
Look it up. That's right. That's right.
No, but it's so true, because part of saying no is saying no to things that are sucking away our lives, right? That are life sucking.
Yeah.
And something that I noticed that everyone is going through right now in this season is grief, because there's just been so much loss. The loss of normality, the loss of lives, the loss of hopes, opportunities, time, money, things that we identified ourselves with, right? And when we go through grief, right, when we experience death, we know what is really important to us. So our bodies is going to rebel against the very things that are going to suck away our life, that feel like death.
Wow.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
So it's so important, right? Number one, to say no to things that feel like death to us. I know that sounds so dramatic, but it really is. Like, trust your body. Your body tells you these
Say that.
Right? Your body and all its mechanisms is used to protect us, but we've been trained, and especially women have been groomed to not trust our bodies, to not trust ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? So listen to your body and what it needs. A tool is breath, because it brings us back to the body. And just to get a little nerdy, like there's two systems in our body. One is the involuntary system that causes us to be able to breathe and calm down, where the other one is the fight or flight. And so when we are worried, on edge, anxiety, all that stuff, your fight or flight system takes over. And so when you breathe intentionally, you're forcing the other system to activate. You're literally fighting against systems that tell you that you're in a dangerous situation.
Wow.
Right? So important. It is an act of resistance when you breathe.
Wow.
You're resisting against death, right? Your breath is the thing that gives you life.
Yes.
So breath, taking time to 5 minutes, 10 minutes in the midst of the chaos to say yes to life. Right?
Yeah.
Take those breaths. I'm breathing as I'm talking. Right.
Even needing to pause. I almost want to pause and breathe, to remember that when you're saying no to something, you're saying yes to breathing, to something that is giving you life. And during different seasons, we're going to have to discern, okay, right now in this season, it's a no because of the season, but it means yes because I'm inviting life. And I love what you're saying about listening to our bodies, listening to our breath, and slowing down. And the very act of doing that is resisting to everything that's taking life away from us. That is so important. What does it look like to you in your day? Go ahead, whatever you want to share, but what does it look like in your day?
It's taking those moments of Selah, right? In the Psalms, you see like that pause, that musical pause.
Yeah.
It allows you to pause and reflect and then change directions.
That's
and
good.
I think that's the practice that I've really integrated in my life,
Yeah.
where, I'll be busy in the mode on autopilot or whatever. And I have to intentionally think about what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And stop and be like,
yeah.
Okay, and gather myself.
That's good. That's
and
so good.
That's related to mindfulness, right? It's a big buzzword out there, but all it really means is just checking in with yourself, noticing your feelings without labeling them and without judging them.
Ooh, we're gonna have to pause and say that again, Angela. Say that again.
Take notice of your feelings without labeling or
good.
judging them.
Wow. That is rich.
Yeah.
That is rich.
Because how often do we talk about, have this narrative in our heads and we're like, oh, we should do this, we shouldn't do that. Oh, and it's just full of doubt.
Or suppressing it and say, no, I shouldn't be thinking that. So not even paying attention to what our bodies are telling us.
Yeah.
That's a lot of unlearning that we're having to do with that phrase that you just gave us. What a gift.
Or I shouldn't be sad right now, right?
Yes, say that.
Everything else is like perfect right now, but why do I feel this way? The holidays are supposed to be happy, but how come I'm not happy?
Right.
There must be something wrong with
me.
Right?
Wow.
What's wrong with me that I'm thinking this?
Yes.
And so mindfulness is about noticing, right? Like that you have these thoughts without judging them. Like I'm feeling sad. Okay, notice I'm feeling sad, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right.
What an act of self-love to not judge it. I think I am my biggest critic, and I don't know if anybody listening or you, if we are, I am going to use an I statement. I am the worst at judging my own feelings, because exactly what you're saying, I should not be feeling this way. Oh, I am this, or I am a pastor. I should not be sad. I should not deal with grief. And so I'm going to stuff. But what an act of self-love and also of self-leading, to say, no, God has access to me through this. I have found, Angela, that my greatest place of mindfulness is washing the dishes. I don't have a dishwasher, but washing, which I hate washing the dishes, Angela.
You are the dishwasher.
I am the dishwasher, but my sink has become my sanctuary. And I was sharing this with one of my chaplain friends at Fuller, where I work part-time. And he was saying, oh, that's called mindfulness. And I said, what? I'm just washing dishes. But I just said, having to wash slows myself down because I'm having to be careful. And I broke about 4 different glasses, like at the beginning of the pandemic, because I think I was so stressed and I was trying to do things fast and carrying all the grief that we were carrying. And so even washing by hand allowed me to be mindful, to slow down and be mindful about what I was doing. And then I listened to God's invitation, and he was saying, what are you carrying? Show me the inside of this bowl. Show me what's in here that you shouldn't be carrying. Talk to me about your sadness. Talk to me about your grief. You may be carrying more than you need to. Give it to me. And so my sink became my sanctuary, and that's my place of mindfulness. It's not like super holy, like none of us, or I don't know anyone who has time to like sit for an hour and just think about it. So I have found that even the ordinary places can become burning bush moments to be mindful of being present to not just to God, but to myself. And you're saying that you're giving me permission to do that.
Yes, do it. That's so beautiful that your sink is a sanctuary. I wish that was mine.
Well, many days it is not. I'm just like, in Spanish we say, nadie me ayuda en esta casa, which is not true. That means no one helps me with the dishes in this house. That is not true. But it feels that way some days. Other times it's holy. My husband is listening to me and he just cleared his throat. But yeah, that is.
Hey, Rob, we're not talking about you.
We're not talking about you at all in this workshop. But you're inviting us to slow down and to be mindful and to listen to those small voices that our body is telling us how to care for self.
Yeah. And if you can even go deeper into that, to kind of unpack it, like, what am I feeling? Where in my body do I feel it? Because sometimes our emotions are stored in our body. Right?
Our emotions are stored in our bodies. That's good.
Yeah. That's why with some people, their anxiety is in their stomach aches, right? Or headaches.
Wow.
Right. So everything is connected. You see psychosomatic pains.
Yes.
People can't figure out, the doctors can't figure out what's wrong with you, but it's really your anxiety or your depression manifesting itself in your body.
Yeah.
And what I like to do is I like to imagine my feeling as like a character or a person. And I literally ask it, like, what do you need? Like, how are you?
Yes, that's so good. My friend Brenda, who is also a chaplain, from her I learned to ask this question, which I think is what you're saying as well. And in sitting and breathing, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's at the sink or wherever it is, to ask myself the question, where does it hurt? And it could not be a strong physical ailment. Like, it's not like, well, I have a headache and it hurts right now, but when we sit, we breathe, we listen to our body, we listen to our breath. When we slow down, when we are mindful, I have started asking the question, where does it hurt? Because we all, like you're saying, we're carrying our emotions in our bodies, we're carrying our pain, and to even ask, where does it hurt? Sometimes it feels like it hurts right here, Angela, in my chest. Sometimes it feels like it's in my gut, like in my womb, right? And so I'll physically put my hand where I think it hurts, and then keep asking, just keep going deeper into the deeper layers of what you're saying. God is inviting us to say, okay, what's the thing below that thing? Because it's not about my heart hurting or my chest hurting. I mean, it could be a physical manifestation that you need to go to the doctor, but to go deeper into that conversation, into that invitation that our bodies are inviting us to converse with God's Holy Spirit. Who wants to speak, who wants to heal, who wants to take us further into healing and wholeness. And that means being aware of our bodies and the layers that we're carrying.
Yeah, that's so important. And, you know, to sit with that feeling and to be okay with it and to invite God into that, right? To have him speak something to your inner child or however you're imagining you're feeling. And how would you interact with that feeling?
Yeah.
Right? Because it is really part of you.
Yeah.
And so that kind of leads me to the third point of, I like to call putting things on the shelf rather than brushing things under the rug.
Yes. Tell us about that thing that I do sometimes.
I mean, I
guess that's survival. It's survival. We all do it. It's a coping mechanism, but it doesn't work long term.
Yeah.
It's not work long term.
It doesn't, because it's kind of like whack-a-mole. You know, you shove it down, then you're washing your dishes, and all of a sudden you're like, that feeling comes up, you're breaking those glasses.
That's right. And then I'm throwing the glass on the
and it's just this game of just shoving it down. And it goes faster and faster and faster. It's an accumulation of all those feelings. So what I like to do, because like you said, it is a survival mechanism, because we literally can't just stop and break down in the middle of our day while we're working.
Right.
In the middle of a sermon.
Yes, exactly.
Let's just do like a corporate like lamentation.
Right now. Stop and lament.
Yes. So putting things on the shelf is like, okay, being mindful first, checking in with yourself. Okay, I feel sad. There's a sadness and grief in me right now. And I'm going to mentally like take it out of my heart, my brain, my gut, or my back, wherever.
Yeah.
Put it in a jar and put it on a shelf, and then tell that feeling, I know you're here. I'm going to get back to you.
Wow.
And literally
you
have to be intentional about making space for that.
Yeah.
To take it off the shelf, you know, at the end of the day, opening it up and examining that feeling again.
Yeah.
Right. And sitting with it. And this I want to say with some discretion too, because if there are people with, you know, diagnosed mental illness, right? Or if you feel like you can't really handle the grief yourself because you've never done it before,
right?
When you open up that jar, it could be not just the grief from the present moment, but like accumulation of
grief,
everything, right? Which can be really overwhelming. So at those times, I think it's helpful to have a professional help you discern through that process.
Yes. And I think that this pandemic, Angela, first of all, that is half the battle. I think naming what it is that we're putting on the shelf is half the battle to know how to deal with it. And I love what you're saying. I'm going to put you right here on the shelf. I'm going to get to you later. But that still means that you're naming it and you're calling it what it is. And it doesn't, it doesn't get suffocated or thrown under the rug. And then the second thing is that this pandemic has exposed different layers of grief, has triggered perhaps past grief. We're seeing that in a lot of our communities, has triggered past grief. and has exposed different layers of grief that different people in society are undergoing. And so there's racial trauma and racial injustice. That's another layer of grief. And then there's socioeconomic status. And do you have access to healthcare? That's another layer of grief as we're dealing with this pandemic. And then unemployment has become an added layer of grief. And then over 280,000 deaths. That is not only happening to those families, that's happening to our communities. And so it is a lot, and our bodies were not created to have this much collective grief, compounded multi-layered grief, and sustained for such a long period of time. Yeah. And so you're absolutely right in pointing us to places where it's become too much, and then knowing what those warning signs are to know, okay, now it's beyond the bookshelf. I'm going to have to go sit with someone and help me walk through what I have on this bookshelf. It's too much. The bookshelf is about to topple over, with everything that we are carrying. And so we all have different life stories and current situations that can make that even more challenging. So thank you for saying that and pointing us towards health. And I know as adults, it is hard enough for us as adults to deal with. What about kids? What about the little ones around us, whether it's our roommates who have children, or nieces and nephews, or maybe we are a babysitter or a kid sitter for someone else, or maybe we have biological children, foster children, adoptive children. Maybe we're teachers, that we have never seen this much grief in our children our children mean like in the school health system. What about kids? Can you give us some pointers on how to talk to the kids around us, whoever they may be, as human beings? They're little human beings too.
Yeah.
Going through a lot.
Such a good question. I think it's important to address the elephant in the room, which is the grief, by talking about it, by naming it, because kids need adults to help them label emotions or what they're feeling. Yeah. And when we talk about it, we destigmatize it.
Yes.
Right. It gives them permission to feel,
that's
to talk. Good. Right. And we're modeling to them how to do it too for themselves. And the danger of not talking about it, of beating around the bush, is that they know what's going on. Yeah. And if we don't clarify things, they're going to internalize their own interpretation of the situation, which may be faulty.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And a lot of the times, like kids, because they don't know, they will internalize it as like, did I do something wrong? Or some kind of core belief, right? Yes. So it's important to kind of address it out in the open, to break that topic. Like there's no topic off limits.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And to talk with them. I know that I've had to do that with my son. I happen to have a son who is 11 years old, and half of the battle is telling him, asking him, are you sad? I like to ask him simple questions in the evening. What made you sad today? In school, what made you happy? And to be able to hold both and say, it's okay to ask about what made us sad, and he'll tell me, and what made us happy. And I'm trying the best I can to normalize. Yes. Because whether we realize it or not, they're listening to the news, they're listening to adults talk about the news, they're listening to, again, the multi-layer of grief and trauma that we have all experienced collectively. And if I don't ask, I don't know what he's thinking. And you're absolutely right. He might have a faulty interpretation of reality. And so as adults, whether we're parents or not, to help children describe and define reality and to see how it's impacting them, that's an important battle as well. So thank you.
That's so good that you do that, because as you're asking him, you're helping him develop the ways to articulate those things. And I think part of healing emotionally is being able to express, rather than having it stuck inside of us.
Exactly. Right? Even if we don't find a solution immediately, like my son will say, well, I'm sad about this, or I miss not being able to go visit grandpa and our family, who is out of state because we can't travel. I'll just say, okay, let's talk about the 5 things that we miss about not going home for the holidays. And it's not that I'm making it super happy, but I'm saying, let's just say, what are 5 people that we miss or 5 things that we miss? Let's also talk about 5 things that we can do here to kind of balance that sadness and grief, and to show our children that sadness and joy can coexist without one canceling the other or one crippling the other. And I know that can be hard to even find the language with adults, but also with children. So thank you for sharing some of that as
it's
well.
like you're showing him how to hold both, you know, and that it's okay to hold both. And I'm even hearing like what you're doing is you're kind of like joining in with him on the process.
That's good.
I think that
I'm glad you think that.
Yeah, I think that as parents or adults,
adults around kids,
you don't want to see a kid sad. You don't want to see a kid hurting. So a lot of people go into problem solving or fix it mode, right?
Yeah.
But one of the hardest things for someone who's going through grief or a difficult time is feeling like they're alone in this. And so when you go into problem solving mode, I feel like, oh, just don't, it's okay. Don't feel this way. Just do this, right? Don't cry. Just do this.
Yeah.
You're not sitting with them still. You're still on the outside. And you're kind of you're kind of dragging them out or trying to, right? But when you be like, yeah, that is sad.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yes.
And you sit and let's talk about what we're sad about. You're joining, you're sitting with them, and they don't feel so alone.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Growing up in a Latino household, Nicaraguan household, as much as I love my father, he's not perfect. That was something that was told to us, and sometimes in our home, no, don't cry. There's no time to cry. We must move forward. Again, that like the strength, we have to be strong in this culture. We have to be strong. We have to overcome this because there's no time to cry. I had to unlearn that growing up. And it wasn't until my 20s that I had to unlearn and say, oh gosh, I need to cry, and it's okay to cry, because the line that was competing in my mind was, there's no time to cry, move forward, be strong. And so, yes, there's so much that we're still unpacking, we're still unlearning in order to be able to walk into health and wholeness. So thank you so much, Angela. You have gifted us with such rich and wise information. And I know that you have given us also, we're going to add a slide here, and you're able to see a slide. Can you tell us a little bit about what this slide provides for us? I know it's additional resources. We can't talk about all the things here. We can't provide all the resources here of the richness of what you bring to us, but tell us about these resources that we do have accessible in case we needed to go call some of these numbers.
Yeah, sure. So the first one is called NAMI. It's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And so it's about learning about mental illness. And there's actually support groups that they host. Now it's online for families whose loved ones haven't, some diagnosed mental illness. And it's really important for family members to be involved in that and to find support. Another one is a suicide hotline, or you can text home to 741 741. It's good to give to your kids just in case, especially if sometimes some kids feel like they can't go to their parents to talk about it because they don't want to add burden to them. And so to be able to access that with their phones is really good, especially now with the pandemic. We see higher rates of depression and suicidality. Another one is the Los Angeles Department of Mental Health. So that provides free mental health services for anyone who has Medi-Cal. You just go on their website and look at their service providers around your area, and you can go ahead and find that. And then the last one that I have is SAMHSA. It's a Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration. That's a mouthful, but it's basically saying if you are struggling with addiction, this is a website or a phone number you can call to get referrals for treatment centers and support groups and other resources.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much, Angela, for giving us these resources. And I know that you say there's plenty more. And if you live in different states, that there may be some additional local community resources that I'm sure you can find on state pages or government pages for your local area as well. So thank you for gifting this to us. And what is one final thought that you want to share with us as we conclude this time? As we have said, this is part of our spiritual formation to deal with our minds, to deal with our hearts, our bodies, and our self-care. That is spiritual formation, and it is important, and the church should be talking about it. Thank you for gifting us from your training and how you integrate your faith with mental health. What is one final thought that you want to leave us with to close this time, Angela?
Yeah, well, thank you for making space for this time and destigmatizing mental health in the church. Something I like to close with is a verse that's always read during the Advent time, Isaiah 9:6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And I just want to say that, it's such a great verse. And I think a lot of the message around it is always seeing this verse in isolation. But when you read like all the verses before, the chapters before, you're like, whoa, this is a really violent picture. Talks about darkness, oppression, burdens, battles, blood, all that stuff. And then in the middle of that, boom, Jesus comes in the midst of this darkness, right? In the midst of violence and social, political unrest. And confusion. And I think that in order for us to see the magnitude of this light, we have to understand the darkness. We have to face the darkness. And we have to read this verse in context. We have to read our lives in context. Right? And so that it is okay and it is important to know where we're at and how we're feeling and all these things, because that only points us to how great Jesus is and what he came here to do for us.
Amen. Thank you, Angela. That is so beautiful. We have to learn to read our lives in context in the same way that we're reading the word of God in context and putting it in context and putting it into conversation with each other for this gospel to free us in our minds, in our hearts, in our bodies, yes, our souls, but that it would be a wholeness and a health that touches every area of our body, especially our minds and our bodies. So thank you, Angela, so much for being with us today. And we hope and pray that those of you who are listening, that this has been a good resource for you and that it further disciples you, further strengthens you, that it builds up our bodies, it builds up our homes, our communities, and our churches as well. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much.